The moment you stop chasing an avoidant person can be the moment they begin wondering where you went. Read that again, because almost no one truly believes it until they experience it firsthand. You may have heard that you should text less, wait a few days, or pretend to be busy, but none of those tactics is the real answer. What creates the biggest shift has far less to do with strategy and much more to do with what is happening inside your own nervous system. Once you understand that, silence will never look the same to you again. Stay with me for the next few minutes, because by the end you'll understand why all the texting, patience, reassurance, and extra effort may have failed to create the response you wanted. More importantly, you'll understand what actually changes the dynamic. But first, answer this honestly. Have you ever been involved with someone who suddenly pulled away right when everything seemed to be going well? If that sounds familiar, comment magnet below. I want to know how many people are experiencing this right now. And before we continue, do 4 quick things. Comment magnet if you're watching because someone suddenly became distant. Subscribe if you want more relationship psychology explained in a simple way. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. And stay until the end, because the final part reveals the exact emotional shift that can make someone reconsider walking away. Now let's examine what is actually happening inside an avoidant person's mind, because this is where most people misunderstand the situation. Avoidance isn't necessarily created by coldness. More often, it develops from fear. At some point in their early emotional experience, closeness became connected with danger. Maybe affection was inconsistent. Maybe love came with conditions. Maybe being vulnerable resulted in criticism, silence, rejection, or control. Eventually, the nervous system learned a basic rule. Closeness means risk, while distance means safety. That rule can remain active long after the original experiences are forgotten. It quietly influences how they respond to intimacy, connection, and emotional expectations. And this is exactly where emotional intelligence becomes important. Emotional intelligence isn't simply about being kind, gentle, or understanding. It's about accurately reading what is happening and responding to reality instead of reacting to the story inside your head. Most people who chase an avoidant partner interpret distance backward. They see withdrawal and assume the solution is more communication, more reassurance, more texts, more affection, or more effort. But to a nervous system already sensitive to closeness, additional attention may not feel comforting. It can feel like pressure, and pressure activates the very reaction you're trying to stop. They pull farther away. Here's the part most people rarely understand. Chasing isn't always really about the other person. It is often your own nervous system trying to escape an uncomfortable emotional state through action. When someone suddenly becomes distant, your body can interpret the uncertainty as a threat. Your mind starts searching for answers. The unknown becomes difficult to tolerate, so you reach for your phone. You send another message, you ask what happened, you check whether they are online. You look for some sign that everything is okay, not necessarily because those actions will solve anything, but because doing something feels easier than sitting with uncertainty. That doesn't make you weak. It's a human response, but a biological impulse isn't always the best strategy. If you want a different outcome, you have to learn how to pause instead of automatically obeying that impulse. So what is the quality that can genuinely make an avoidant person become more curious about you? It isn't mystery. It isn't manipulation. It isn't pretending you don't care. It is emotional self-sufficiency that can be felt without being announced. Think about that for a moment. An avoidant person isn't necessarily searching for someone who is completely unavailable. Often, without consciously realizing it, they are drawn towards someone whose emotional stability doesn't depend entirely on their behavior. Someone whose mood, confidence, and sense of worth don't rise and fall based on whether a message receives a response in 10 minutes or 3 hours. And when they sense that difference, something changes. The pressure they normally associate with closeness begins to disappear because your emotional stability isn't demanding anything from them. And when pressure decreases, curiosity has room to return. Curiosity can become the doorway back toward connection. This is also where much relationship advice goes wrong. People are often told to fake independence, pretend you're busy, post something designed to make them jealous, delay your responses intentionally, act as though you don't care. But someone with avoidant tendencies can become surprisingly sensitive to emotional performance. They may have spent years watching people carefully, looking for changes in mood, tension, expectations, or hidden pressure. That can make them especially aware when someone is pretending. If your calm is only an act, eventually it becomes visible. What creates attraction isn't the appearance of independence, it is genuine inner stability. So let's make this practical. What does real emotional self-sufficiency actually look like? It begins with something many people completely skip: identifying the emotion before reacting to it. When someone becomes quiet and you suddenly feel tension in your chest, don't immediately reach for your phone. Ask yourself what the feeling actually is. Is it fear of abandonment? Is it an old rejection wound being activated? Is it anxiety caused by uncertainty? Or is it simply the discomfort of not knowing what will happen next? Your first instinct may be to make the feeling disappear through action. Send a message, make a call, check their status, ask for reassurance. But every time you immediately interrupt discomfort with action, you miss the opportunity to learn that you can actually survive the feeling without doing anything. Instead, you teach your brain that discomfort must always be followed by action. That creates a cycle. The uncomfortable feeling appears, you chase, you get temporary relief, and then the next silence creates the same urge again. Over time, that pattern becomes easier to detect from the outside than you realize. An avoidant person may not be able to explain exactly what they're sensing, but they can feel the emotional pressure underneath the interaction. The people who stop triggering the chase and withdraw cycle aren't people who suddenly stop caring. They are people who can feel deeply without immediately acting on every emotion. That space between feeling something and reacting to it is where your real strength develops, and you can practice it in a very simple way. The next time someone's silence lasts longer than you would like, don't immediately reach for your phone. Give yourself 60 seconds. Notice where the discomfort appears. Maybe it's in your chest. Maybe your stomach tightens. Maybe your throat feels tense. Don't judge it. Don't fight it. Don't distract yourself from it. Simply observe it like a passing wave. You don't need to solve it in that moment. You only need to prove to yourself that you can experience uncertainty without immediately chasing relief. Repeat this enough times, and the automatic connection between anxiety and pursuit begins to weaken. Then something changes. You become less reactive. Your communication becomes calmer, your choices become more intentional, and the entire way you show up in relationships starts to look different. Now here's an idea that may completely change the way you understand this dynamic. An avoidant person isn't necessarily testing how much you love them. In many situations, their nervous system is responding to how emotionally regulated you are. Every withdrawal, delayed response, or sudden shift can unconsciously answer one question: will this person's emotional state depend on what I do next? If they sense that your entire emotional world changes based on their behavior, closeness can begin feeling like responsibility. And responsibility for another person's emotional stability is exactly the kind of pressure their nervous system may have learned to avoid. But if the answer is no, if you're warm, caring, and emotionally available while still remaining grounded in yourself, the experience becomes different. You stop feeling like pressure and start feeling more like safety. And underneath all the distancing, many avoidant people deeply want safety. The problem is that safety becomes difficult to tolerate when it arrives wrapped in overwhelming emotional demand. This is one reason chasing tends to make the cycle worse. Chasing communicates urgency. And to an already sensitive nervous system, urgency can resemble danger even when the intention behind it is love. But there's another layer here that matters even more. Emotional self-sufficiency doesn't mean acting as though you don't care. It doesn't mean becoming cold, unavailable, or emotionally detached. Pretending not to care is simply another performance, and performances require constant energy. What you're building is something much more authentic, an internal source of emotional security. The phrase may sound complicated, but the idea is simple. Your ability to feel okay cannot depend entirely on another person's response. Your mood doesn't need to collapse because a message wasn't answered overnight. Your confidence doesn't disappear because someone suddenly needs space. Your sense of worth existed before this person entered your life, and it remains yours whether they move closer or farther away. Building that internal stability doesn't begin with changing the relationship. It begins with changing how you treat yourself when nobody else is watching. Are you keeping the promises you make to yourself? Are you continuing toward your goals even when your relationship feels uncertain? Are you taking care of your body, your responsibilities, your friendships, and your own interests, regardless of what one person is doing? Because here's an uncomfortable truth. When your entire emotional world becomes centered around one person's response time, you have already handed that person an enormous amount of power. They may never hear you say anything needy. You may never ask them directly for reassurance. But emotional dependence can still be felt through behavior, timing, tone, and reactions. People often notice emotional pressure long before they can explain it logically. And that is why the real solution isn't learning clever texting tricks or mastering some perfect waiting period. The real work is becoming emotionally grounded enough that you don't need a strategy to make someone chase you. You simply stop chasing because your life, your identity, and your emotional stability are no longer waiting for another person to tell you that you're okay. And that is where the entire dynamic can begin to change. It means creating a life that feels complete enough that one relationship becomes an important part of your world instead of becoming your entire world. And when that shift happens naturally, and I mean genuinely rather than as an act, an avoidant partner can often sense it very quickly. The entire dynamic begins to change. Instead of you constantly revolving around their availability, they start noticing your emotional steadiness. They notice that your peace doesn't disappear when they become distant. And that kind of inner stability has a pull of its own. You don't have to force it. You don't have to announce it. Now, there is a mistake almost everyone makes after discovering this idea, and misunderstanding it can actually make the situation worse. Some people hear self-sufficiency and assume it means becoming cold. They match silence with silence. They respond to distance by creating even more distance, but that isn't genuine independence. Punishing someone through withdrawal is still a reaction. Their behavior is still controlling your behavior, only in reverse. Real self-sufficiency is completely different. You can remain kind. You can stay emotionally open. You can express interest when you genuinely feel it. What changes is that you stop organizing your entire emotional life around whether they are available. You stop checking your phone every few minutes. You stop replaying conversations that haven't even happened. You stop planning your entire day around whether a message arrives. That distinction matters because avoidant people can usually sense the difference between someone who is intentionally punishing them and someone who is simply living their own life. One creates tension. The other creates emotional safety. Now let's talk about timing, because this is where many people become frustrated and give up just before the dynamic has enough time to change. Nervous systems don't rewrite long-standing patterns overnight. If someone has spent years connecting closeness with danger, a few days or even a few weeks of healthy interaction won't instantly erase those associations. Instead, the change often appears through small experiments. They might message you after a long period of silence. They may stay in a conversation slightly longer than usual. They might unexpectedly reveal something personal and then immediately become distant, almost as if their own openness surprised them. This back and forth doesn't automatically mean nothing is working. Sometimes it is the nervous system checking whether the safety is genuine or temporary. Your role in those moments isn't to celebrate the opening like you finally won something. Don't grab onto it as though it's your only chance. Simply receive the moment calmly. Treat it as a normal interaction rather than proof that the entire relationship has suddenly changed. That calm response can quietly teach their nervous system that opening up doesn't create a flood of expectations. And that can make it easier for them to open up again later. This is patience based on understanding rather than patience based on wishful thinking. There is a huge difference between the two. Hope keeps you staring at your phone and wondering when they will return. Understanding allows you to put the phone down because you aren't constantly confused by every change in their behavior. You recognize the pattern, but you don't let the pattern control your day. Now let's make this practical, because insight without action rarely creates meaningful change. If you want to become someone who naturally feels emotionally safe and attractive to an avoidant partner, begin by examining where your attention actually goes throughout the day. How often do you think about their last message? How many times do you check whether they've replied? How much of your internal conversation is spent analyzing their tone, their silence, their online activity, or their latest behavior? Don't judge yourself for noticing these patterns. Simply become aware of them. Awareness is powerful because you cannot change a pattern that you refuse to see clearly. Once you recognize where your attention is going, begin redirecting some of that energy into things that genuinely belong to you. Work on a personal project, reconnect with a friend, improve a physical goal, learn something new, spend time doing something that makes you feel like yourself again. This isn't about pretending to be busy so they think you're unavailable. It isn't a performance designed to make someone miss you. It's about rebuilding a life that actually feels full. A real life produces authentic calm. Fake calm eventually breaks when emotions become intense because it was never supported by anything real. But when your stability comes from your own goals, relationships, interests, and identity, another person's silence doesn't have the same power over you. And when you interact with them, practice responding rather than reacting. A reaction is immediate and emotionally driven. A response includes a small pause. Even a few seconds before replying can change the energy behind your words. You're no longer communicating from urgency, you're communicating from choice. And choice is often far more powerful than any carefully crafted sentence. Here is the idea that connects everything we've been talking about. People are not naturally drawn towards someone who desperately needs them to feel okay. They are more likely to feel curious about someone who inspires them and has a life of their own. Need can create pressure, and pressure can be especially uncomfortable for someone who already associates closeness with losing freedom or control. Genuine inspiration creates a different emotional experience. It creates curiosity, and curiosity can encourage connection without forcing it. You cannot manufacture that through texting tricks. You cannot create it by calculating exactly how long to wait before replying. It develops from the quiet process of becoming someone whose life has meaning whether another person is present or absent. And this isn't a manipulation strategy designed to make an avoidant partner chase you. It is what naturally happens when you stop handing someone else responsibility for your emotional stability. Ironically, that can be exactly what makes closeness feel safer. They can experience you as someone who doesn't disappear the moment things become difficult, but who also doesn't fall apart the moment things become quiet. You become emotionally steady without becoming emotionally demanding. And that difference can completely change how the relationship feels. But now comes the part many people miss. How do you know whether this shift is actually beginning to work? Because early signs are usually subtle, and people who are used to chasing often overlook them. The first sign is rarely a huge declaration. It's usually something simple. They reach out first without needing an excuse. No crisis, no practical reason, no apology, just a message because they wanted to make contact. That may look insignificant, but initiating without a built-in reason requires a small amount of vulnerability. For someone who normally protects themselves through distance, that matters. Don't dismiss it simply because it isn't dramatic. The second sign is that conversations begin lasting longer without an abrupt ending. If interactions that previously ended quickly now continue naturally, something may be changing beneath the surface. Their system may be deciding that staying emotionally present for a little longer feels safe enough. And here's the important part. Don't point it out. Don't say, "Look, you're finally opening up." Don't make them aware that you're measuring their behavior. The moment you turn an unconscious feeling of safety into something they believe is being evaluated, pressure can return. Let the interaction remain natural. The third sign is increased personal disclosure. They begin sharing small details about their day, their thoughts, their history, or things they're worried about without you having to ask. This can be one of the clearest signs that trust is developing, because someone who protects their inner world carefully doesn't usually offer personal information without a reason. When those details begin appearing voluntarily, receive them gently. Show warmth. You can be curious, but don't interrogate them. There's a difference between wanting to understand someone and making them feel like they're being examined. And now we need to discuss one of the fastest ways to destroy the progress you've made: declaring victory too soon. The moment you treat every small step toward closeness as proof that the relationship is finally fixed, pressure can return. Their vulnerability becomes evidence. Their message becomes a sign you analyze. Their openness becomes something they feel responsible for repeating. Nobody wants to feel like their emotions are being used as proof in an argument about whether they care. So keep your own emotional temperature steady even when theirs begins warming. Don't become overly excited every time they move closer. Consistency is more powerful than celebration. Trust grows through repeated safe experiences, not through one perfect moment. But there is another truth you need to hear, because this entire idea can become unhealthy if you misunderstand it. This approach is not a guaranteed formula for making one particular person choose you. It explains the conditions that can make closeness easier for someone who has avoidant tendencies. Possibility is not certainty. Some people are actively working through their patterns. Others aren't. Some have developed enough emotional awareness to recognize their behavior and change it. Others may continue repeating the same cycle no matter how calm or patient you become. Your emotional regulation can create a safer environment, but it cannot do another person's inner work for them. You can open a door, but you cannot force someone to walk through it. And understanding that protects you from creating a new version of the same problem. You might stop chasing outwardly while secretly chasing inwardly. You may look calm on the surface while constantly wondering when they'll come back. You may stop sending messages but continue measuring your worth by whether they eventually reach out. That's not freedom. That's simply silent waiting. True emotional independence means your life continues moving forward regardless of whether they return. You can care about them without putting your life on pause. You can remain open without becoming dependent. You can hope for connection without needing it to validate your worth. And once you reach that point, something powerful happens. You no longer need to make someone chase you, because you're no longer chasing them either. You're simply living, growing, connecting, and becoming more grounded in yourself. And if they choose to move closer, they are meeting you there by choice, not because you manipulated them into doing it.